Welcome back for part 2 of every comic book movie ever ranked. This is Sal for Drunk Nerd Sober Nerd, and I've watched all of the comic book movies. All of them. Please check out part 1 to see the rules and the worst of the worst if you haven't already, and brace yourselves as we explore the dull and mediocre films of part 2 on our journey to get to the top of the list. Warning again, there are spoilers for everything ever, and you will simply not always agree with my ranking, so let's just get used to that idea as soon as possible. Let's get started with number 128. Okay, so this is a PG Richard Pryor movie that happens to have Superman in it. You might think, at least it'll be funny, but no, it's not. You can tell they started doing some cool things from the comics and then someone came along and was like, nah, this has to be shittier. For instance, it almost does Brainiac, but then it doesn't. It almost does Bizarro Superman, but no, not quite. Clearly the person who wrote this story about Superman fighting a computer had no idea what a computer was or what they did. Also, if you pay close attention, you'll notice that the film is a heavy-handed metaphor for drug and alcohol addiction. I could do a whole video on this, but oh, look at the time. 1:27. Got work to do. It's not the worst film ever, but was this really the best they could do with a character with this much depth? Daredevil is a deep and gritty series and deserved much better. Bad CG, shoddy wire work, and a few flat performances don't help its case.
I was raised in the Bronx, Wesley. This is something you wouldn't understand.
If you're gonna watch it, I recommend the director's cut. It's more violent and has a tighter vision, but it still suffers from a Nickelbacky, hoobastankish soundtrack and lame villains, most notably Colin Farrell. He's just dreadful.
Let's bring on the pain.
126. Like its sequel, it's quite cheesy and full of awfulness. But this was before director Joel Schumacher decided to go full Antichrist and open the seventh seal. Val Kilmer plays it as bland as he possibly can. Tommy Lee Jones plays it as wacky as he can, which is a dumb move while acting opposite Jim Carrey, who is the only highlight of the movie. He's basically the star of it, but it's still a little too over the top even for him.
Was that over the top? I can never tell.
125. Going up this list, the Crow films get better and better as they go backwards. Goyer! This one really did have some great imagery, but it's still really lousy. Mia Kirshner is the embodiment of every 90s girl's Delia's catalog fantasy. Speaking of fantasies, this film does have Thomas Jane masturbating in a stupid wig, so there you go. 124. If you were like me and were a huge Turtles cartoon fan, you'll appreciate that they included Bebop, Rocksteady, Baxter Stockman, and Krang in this one. But it's just more of the same of the Transformers style of put as much shit on the screen as possible to distract you from an atrocious movie. 123.
Thank you for your contributions so far.
Ah yes, the film that drove Sean Connery into retirement. Can't think of anything about it that's really bad per se, but nothing good either. It's unique, I guess, it's absurd, it's classic pulp. It's also wildly mediocre and unmemorable.
It was nothing.
This guy looked pretty cool, I guess. So there's something.
Your past haunts you.
$122. The book was better. Characters were changed, the plot was dulled down, and we were left with just a predictable, not very engaging murder mystery. Kate Beckinsale is fine, and also fine, but damn, this movie is boring. Movies like this often rely on darkness to build suspense, and I love that this takes place almost completely in brightness. It's unique, but that doesn't make it good. They knew that audiences would get bored, you can tell, because they stuck a gratuitous shower scene in the first act just to get our attention. It worked for about 10 minutes. 121. Ghost Rider's kinda fun. Goyer! If it suffers from anything, it's mostly casting. Oh, and a lot of bad CGI. The stigma attached to having Nicolas Cage in there is one thing, but he does a fine enough job. But the American Beauty kid as Blackheart, he reminded me more of Wei Yun from Deep Space Nine. Not very threatening. Number 120. A little more grounded than the second one in the series, but it still puts me into a drooly, stupid CGI coma. 119. The first act of this movie is really awesome. It's imaginative and promising. And then it's hit or miss.
Alright! You got yourself a deal!
Mostly misses with a few highlights. Unfortunately, this was Bridget Fonda's last film. Unfortunately, this wasn't John Turturro's last film. This movie made me say a sentence that I never thought I'd say in my whole life. Chris Kattan is so excellent in this. 118. Okay, it's not bad, it's also not very good. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what's wrong with it, and it's in those cases that we blame the director. It had a first-time director who was also the writer. How did that happen? Well, his wife was the producer. Not a good sign. Thomas Jane was okay. Rebecca Romaine gets to not be painted blue, but John Travolta always makes the worst bad guy.
14 shipments are perfect. One went bad, and I get this why. Because you want to scare me? Are you not aware that I graduated top of my class?
Whenever he acts angry in anything, it's always forced and awkward. 117. Strap on your dyed black wigs and get ready for an over-the-top sequel. Idris Elba forgot to take out his yellow contacts from Thor. I'm actually torn on this one. Another example of the first movie maybe being better on paper, but that one played it a little too safe with its watered-down origin love story. The sequel is completely crazy and fucking awesome.
Gripping at the door! Gripping at the door!
Don't get me wrong, it feels like it's written by a 12-year-old. Goyer! But it tries to go in a more interesting direction, and had some really excellent visual choices from the ADHD-ridden directors of Crank. This might not be a popular opinion, but I'd much rather watch this daring mess than its predictable predecessor.
You're a bad man!
116.
No. Please.
After the excellent Spider-Man 2, the last thing audiences expected was 2.5 hours of hot garbage.
Please don't say that.
An alien meteorite happens to land next to Spider-Man out of the 7 billion other people on the planet. Okay. Mary Jane is jealous of Spider-Man because he's famous and she's not. Alrighty. The Venom suit turns Spider-Man into a cokehead, so he has not one but 2 painfully awful dance sequences. Ooh. I'm all for artistic license and doing something creative and different, but there's just no other way to spin that this is just fucking horrible. And then Harry's stupid butler comes over with,
"If I may, sir."
"I've known since the first movie that Spider-Man didn't kill your father, but I'm just telling you now because the plot."
Thanks, Bernard.
You dick. I always thought that this scene was beautifully done, though. 115. The film completely changed the approach of the original Alan Moore graphic novel. It stars Johnny Depp as a character who in the book doesn't show up until 2/3 of the way through the story. They also made him a psychic drug addict for some reason. These changes didn't save the film from mediocrity. Ian Holm, though, gives a really strong standout performance, but the film is still a bit too dull to ever want to watch again. 114. Green Lantern is a mess. Forget the obvious bad CG animated suit stuff. The character's motivations make absolutely no sense. And the hero, Hal Jordan, is a complete asshole. He gets people fired for no reason and then beats them up in an alley when he gets powers. He steals drinks. He quits training to learn how to use his awesome superpowers on a crazy alien planet because it's too hard. He puts a helicopter on a complicated Hot Wheels track, endangering everyone's lives instead of just stopping it. Nothing he does leads the viewer to believe that he's not an asshole. And the heart of the story is about how he's the most worthy being in our section of the galaxy.
But the ring chose me. It was a great honor. Responsibility. Maybe on their planet, responsibility just means asshole.
When your most likable, relatable character is a pink alien snob guy who looks like a child molester, your movie has a problem. 113. This is probably one of the most violent testosterone-driven films on this list, which is ironic since it was directed by a woman. It's not much in the way of story, but it does a fine job of being what it needed to be. That is, before we got a taste of what The Punisher could be like with great writing and performances. Ray Stevenson is a dead ringer for Frank Castle, and he's also Thor's buddy Volstagg in those films. Also, props to McNulty for a very entertaining take on Jigsaw.
The Punisher will be dead!
112.
Hey guys, over there!
For some parents, the first movie was too dark and violent.
They're babies!
They complained, and then we got this kid-friendly slapstick sequel.
They're stupid!
This movie would rank a lot lower for some people, I know, but for me it's pure nostalgia. The summer it came out on VHS, my cousin and I watched it every day for 10 days straight. Surprisingly, a lot of the humor stands up. Fight choreography is still really impressive, and it definitely had a personality unlike Part 3. It also had a healthy dose of Vanilla Ice.
The ninja rap is performed in the movie by one of the hottest rap groups in America, Vanilla Ice, which makes the song and dance turtle-rific.
111. Not a DC comic property you would expect to get its own film, but it managed to pull together a really impressive cast. And Josh Brolin fits this character perfectly. However, the film itself, especially the second half, is largely unfocused and weak. 110. The third blade is mostly style over substance, just shot after shot of coolness, or what was considered coolness in 2004. Wesley Snipes was fighting with the director during production, Goyer! And it really shows. He refused to shoot certain scenes, and his dialogue is mostly one-liners, leaving Ryan Reynolds to overcompensate. And overcompensate he does. Jessica Biel is the highlight here. She was actually really good. But not even the dreamy Reynolds-Biel combo is cute enough to put this one up with the other Blade films.
Gucci go.
109. X-Men 3 is what happens when a franchise is too big and a studio pushes for a release too fast. Directors dropped out and then they hired world-renowned sleazebag Brett Ratner to get all the blame. It did so much damage to the franchise that they had to actually make a whole other movie to go back in time and undo it. It wasn't completely without merit, but it was definitely a colossal drop in quality from X2. Ellen Page was a great addition, and Kelsey Grammer as Beast is probably the most perfect dream casting in the history of the genre. 108. Ava Green made an awesome badass female villain. That's really about all this film had going for it. Otherwise, it was more of the same, trying to recapture whatever made the first film a hit, but it falls flat. The coolest part was the last 5 minutes, when Cersei comes in and royally destroys every fucking one. 107. I really did not want to watch Josie and the Pussycats. Honestly, I was dreading it that whole week. I never cared much about the Archie comics, but it was actually pretty funny. It didn't take itself too seriously, it looked really fun to make, and it had a song about butt sex. 106. The Silver Surfer himself was way cool, although a little simplified.
Oh, that is cool.
But all that cool was overshadowed by Galactus being portrayed as a massive cloud. Look, I know doing a giant man in a purple suit that eats planets isn't exactly an easy task for a film like this, but they should have known comic fans would never let this go. Other than that, these films are fine, they're fun and lighthearted, but a little too silly. 105. The Bourne Retirement. Fantastic cast, just like the first film, but the charm is kinda wearing off the second time around, guys. Anthony Hopkins steals this film about halfway through, though. I feel like every role Hopkins is in lately, he's cast as the most serious, wisest boss man motherfucker ever. For good reason, too, I mean, he's good at it. But seeing him play a goofy eccentric was such a breath of fresh air, and it was the only bona fide highlight of the film for me. 104.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
There's no real first act, and there's no real protagonist. It was torn to shreds by 7 different editors in a panic from the studio due to negative Batman v Superman reviews. It feels like a giant Hot Topic music video for every song ever. The Joker, it's brave, nice try, doesn't work. The Batman scenes are pretty damn cool, although short. Margot Robbie really is fantastic in it, but I recommend just watching the trailers. The trailer is a really good movie. 103. This is basically Men in Black, but for dead people instead of aliens. Like, that's really it. The premise and characters are so similar, it's jarring. And it seems like taking a page from Men in Black is what the producers were going for, since it's so different from the tone of the original comic. Jeff Bridges' performance, however, is sensational, but it's the only standout thing about it. 102. Hulk's story plays out very similar to a Greek tragedy. It's all acted well by the cast and tried doing some daring things visually, like using comic book style cells and scenes. Some of it worked and a lot of it didn't. And despite the massive effort that went into it, the CGI technology just was not there yet. That and the Hulk dogs are unfortunately all most people remember about this film. 101. I could go on and on about how much I love the Wolverine origin comic. It was beautifully done. Yeah, this movie shits all over that and misses the point. It also takes a gargantuan shit on realistic-looking claws, and a whopping mega shit on Deadpool. But it did give us Gambit and Blob for the first time, and a great Sabretooth. This was the point where Hugh Jackman really started putting himself into the role, but Fox was still making this cliched crap. Thankfully, they eventually caught up to him. Number 100. I find that more casual moviegoers don't even remember this series existing, and that's because no one really wanted it to. The first one rehashed the Spidey origin again, and this one has a convoluted plot about Peter's parents. Andrew Garfield made a pretty good Spider-Man, but I never really bought his Peter Parker, and unfortunately they go hand in hand. He's not the nerdy, hopeless character we love. He's too cool at times, and other times he's kind of a dopey jock and not very good at science like he was in his first movie.
Did you try magnetizing them?
I didn't.
Okay, well, remember 8th grade science class?
That said, it's not a completely useless film. It's entertaining, up until a pretty dark, disturbing ending. And if you ignore that Electro's main motivation for hating Spider-Man is that Spider-Man didn't remember his name.
What's your name again?
How could you forget me?
What? 99. Heimdall, Captain America, Gamora, and the comedian in an A-Team style, big dumb fun action comedy. It's pretty entertaining and surprisingly faithful to the comic, if you excuse the toned down violence to get the PG-13 rating. It was Warner Brothers' first and arguably better attempt at an ensemble anti-hero comic book film before Suicide Squad. 98. What the fuck happened here? David Harbour was great actually. Better than expected, but this film was just nonsensical. It was definitely more true to the comic book, but maybe too much so? It includes storylines from like 10 different Hellboy comics. Very messy. The best way I can describe what's going on with this story is plot salad. Some of the effects in green screen looked horrendous, especially the girl throwing up ghosts effect. That looked terrible. It's a shame. I was really looking forward to this, and there was some good stuff in there, but this just did not come together properly. 97. A good old, lighthearted Disney comic book movie. Before Disney was comic book movies. If 2011's Captain America movie reminded you of The Rocketeer, that's because they were purposely going for that tone, and hired the same director. It's dull in some parts, but overall a good film, especially for kids. Adult me, though, has a hard time rooting for a guy that will strap a rocket to his back with nothing but a piece of gum keeping him from exploding. That's just irresponsible. All I'm saying is he had a few minutes, he could have done a quick weld. And that's it for part 2. Thank you for watching. The films are getting a little better, right? I think. Join us for part 3 of our 5-part series where things are bound to get better. I hope. Please like and subscribe, and see you then.